families, creating a lifetime of memories. Sadly, some families are denied these important moments due to the sad practice of alienation. These are families divided.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Families Divided TV. Trauma is another word for injury. Severe parental alienation results in trauma to children. Parent alienation trauma can impair learning ability, interfere with brain development, and result in physical illness. The trauma can result in behavioral, emotional, relationship, and mental health problems. Dr. Steve Lindenberg discusses the trauma of severe parental alienation to children in this instructive and easy to understand presentation. We're going to also hear from one of our presenters at our upcoming fall conference, October 13th through the 15th. Dr. Sue Kornbluth is going to be discussing with you what she will be sharing in her presentation. The title of our conference is Alienation, the Truth Regarding the Trauma and the Abuse. I want to let you know this conference is going to be by far the most intense and informative that we have ever had regarding alienation and the truth regarding trauma and abuse. Great presentations, great presenters from all over the world. Will begin on Friday night at 7 p.m. and then we'll go straight through until 10 o'clock on Sunday night. Friday night and Saturday night, after we all meet together, if you wish to stay or join anytime from anywhere, it's an international virtual conference. We're going to have the line open with a breakout room for one-on-one conversation with those who want to discuss with others who do understand where they are because they're dealing with it themselves. That'll be open from 9 p.m. until 7 a.m. Then we'll begin back with our conference presentations and then other things on Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night. We'll close Sunday night with those that want to share their testimonies to be able to do that. We're going to run from 7 p.m. Friday night till 10 p.m. Sunday night, 2.5 days packed full of many things, both fun, educational, and informative and supportive. And please be a part of it. We have many that have already registered. We're getting really excited, and I hope you'll be able to join us as well. Again, it is international, it is virtual. If you can't be there with us all the time, not a problem. If you miss presentations, you can view them anytime you want at another time, and that's not a problem, but you do have to register ahead of time. So please join us if you can. We'd love to have you. So we're going to be right back with Dr. Sue Kornbluth's presentation info, as well as Dr. Stephen Lindberg right after these messages.
Sadly, too many know the pain and trauma associated with parental and grandparent alienation. Family Access, Fighting for Children's Rights, will present an important international virtual conference on October the 13th through the 15th, 2023. The conference, entitled Alienation, the Truth Regarding the Trauma and Abuse, will feature world-renowned experts in the field of alienation. You'll join the conference event coordinator, Elaine Cobb, and moderator, Megan Hunter, as they introduce you to keynote speaker, Dr. Edward Kruk. Plus, you'll hear important presentations from Dr. Joshua Coleman, Lisa Rothfuss, Dr. Mary Alvarez, Chris Smith, Bill Eddy, Dr. Noel Hunter, Dr. Sue Kornbluth, Dr. William Burnett, Megan Hunter, and Jordan Traeger. Join the many attendees already securing their spot for the conference entitled Alienation, the Truth Regarding the Trauma and Abuse. For information, visit familyaccess.info for all the details. The special conference is being hosted by Family Access, Fighting for Children's Rights, Steel Partners Foundation, and PASCA, Parental Alienation is Child Abuse.
Divorce and co-parenting are a major life interruption for families, especially the kids, but also for parents and grandparents. And it's even worse in blame-filled, high-conflict cases. When parents engage in alienation by turning the kids against the other parent or grandparents, kids suffer. They're denied the opportunity to build the 4 big skills necessary for future resilience. New Ways for Families online class can help. Parents learn to use our popular BIF and EAR skills to calm the conflict and stop the hostile emails and texts. And we even have a class for kids and parents to learn together. Research shows a 75% improvement in joint parental decision-making after this course is taken, plus overall improvements for kids' well-being. Don't wait to make this affordable investment in your children's future and improve your well-being too. Start learning new ways for your family today at conflictplaybook.com.
Hello, my name is Dr. Steve Lindenberg, and I'm going to present a program for you this morning. I'm an expert in parent alienation, and I want to share how the trauma of parent alienation affects children. So first, let's have a brief definition. What is trauma? Well, trauma is just another word for injury. It's a clinical word for injury. So most of the effects that I'm going to discuss this morning are common sense. You'll find that, oh yeah, that makes sense. And you'll be able to relate to it. I'm going to try to present it in easily understandable terms for you today. So let's talk about the severity of parent alienation and trauma to childhood, and the relationship between the events that happen in parent alienation and what happens to children as a result. And one area that you might want to think about is why is trauma such a big topic these days? Well, think about how trauma becomes hardwired. Most of us have had an experience where we've, pardon me, where we've touched a hot stove. And I'll bet if you've ever touched a hot stove like I have, you never touched one again. Why is that? Well, that's because when you touch something hot like that, or when you have something that injures you from an action that you've taken, your brain develops an automatic trigger response to that stimulus. In this case, it's the hot stove surface. You touch the stove, before you even recognize it, your hand is pulled back, but you've also created a hard wire between, a hard link between that event and the trauma to your brain so that you'll never do it again. So I'd like you to keep that example in mind as we go through some of the ways that severe alienation traumatizes children. I wanted to put in another word of caution, not another word, but just a word of caution. So as I review these effects, I'm mindful that some of the viewers of this presentation have gone through trauma. It may have been the trauma of a car accident, it may have been the trauma of an assault, it may have been from intimate partner violence, and it also may have been from being a child in a high conflict, severe parent alienation custody case. So, and those kinds of cases are now considered to be a form of child abuse by most experts in the field. So if this presentation triggers any unpleasant associations for you or recollections, please share that with someone close to you. Because I think it's helpful to say, wow, that reminded me of something that happened to me X number of years ago. And having the support of a caring person can get you through that little recollection. So let's talk now about the actual trauma. There's several aspects to the trauma. Cognition, brain development is another one. Oh, by the way, cognition is just a fancy word for thinking. Brain development is another one. Physical health is another one. behavioral changes, behaviors in general, emotions, relationships, and mental health. So I'm going to start today with the cognitive development. Think of cognitive development as your ability to learn. And a lot of people call it IQ, but its cognitive ability is more than IQ. It's also your aptitude, your ability to grasp new concepts and subjects, to apply your intelligence to everyday tasks. So what can happen as a result of trauma is a child can wind up not having the full readiness to learn because the distraction of the severe stress and trauma is such that it impairs the ability to learn. Problem solving can also be difficult. Your mind is distracted. Your cognitive ability is suppressed. And so it's difficult to solve problems. In very young children, early infancy and early childhood, we often see language delays. Children will be withdrawn and won't speak at the age that you expect the child to speak, which is generally between 12 and 18 months. And so those language delays can impact the ability to learn as well. Another problem is the loss of concentration. If you're in the middle of a traumatic family situation where police might be called, or your parents are arguing, or one parent is hitting the other one, a parent is breaking furniture or breaking glass or dishes, that can cause a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, and it can also interfere with your ability to concentrate. Think of it as going to school as a safe place, and then you come home and you don't know what to expect. So that can really affect your concentration. And of course, if all of those elements are affected, it's going to result in poor academic achievement. So what does academic achievement mean? Simple term, grades. You're not going to be able to get good grades if you're having problems with your ability to learn. Summing that together is another element of learning that's very important, and it's your ability to demonstrate self-control, monitor yourself, your own behaviors, your own reactions, demonstrate emotional control, have mental flexibility so that you can jump from task to task to task, because very often we don't just have one task. We might be talking on the telephone while dinner is cooking and somebody comes to the door. So these tasks all require flexibility. They require your ability to organize your thoughts, organize your materials, your ability to initiate the tasks. Which one comes first? Do I go and attend my child that is screaming? Do I make sure that the soup is not boiling over, or do I go and answer the door? Those are the kinds of things that most of us deal with. We come upon those and deal with them automatically. We don't really think about it. We just do it. But organizing and storing things in your working memory, well, first I'll do this, then I'll do this, then the last thing I'll do is this. So you might have 3 things to do, and you might store 2 of them in your working memory while you're working on the other one. And planning and managing your time. All of these elements of functioning, we call it executive functioning, but it's really day-to-day living skills, life skills. All of those are impaired as a result of trauma from parent alienation. Let's go on to brain development. And most brain development takes place, in infancy and early childhood. We know that the brain is a plastic organ. It doesn't mean it's made out of plastic. It means that it's still growing and forming and changing into mid-20s. But the most vulnerable period of time is in infancy and early childhood. And when there's a lot of stress around a child, an infant and a toddler or preschooler, oftentimes we'll see a smaller brain size. So that's not a good thing. That's just, again, just common sense. You want to have an average to normal size brain. If you have a smaller brain size, that could mean that you might have learning difficulties and learning disabilities. Also, because of the distractions and the constant vigilance, having to look out for what's going to happen next, there's often less efficient processing. The child and infant feel less secure. They can't process what's going on. In a healthy family, somebody might read to a child, might explain this is going to happen, this is going to happen. But in a family that demonstrates chaos as a result of severe parent alienation, there's going to be trauma and there's going to be less efficient processing. And there may also be impaired stress response. So there could be an overreaction to stress, or there could be an underreaction to stress. So when a child overreacts to stress, they tend to act out, they tend to cry more, they tend to whine more, they tend to get into more trouble, more mischief, because the child wants to change the subject from their mom and dad fighting to have the focus on the child. The same, on the opposite end, you might have a child that withdraws, that curls up in a ball, that doesn't come out and play, that seems lethargic, doesn't have a lot of energy. So that's the impaired stress response. Let's talk about physical health next. And physical health, we run into sleep disorders. Very simply put, the child wants to sleep too much, or more often than not, erratic sleep. And this is particularly true now as children age up into the 10 to 12-year-old group, and particularly teenagers. You see a lot more sleep disorders where children are sleep deprived because there's so much chaos in their mind, and maybe chaos in the house from severe parent alienation, that they don't feel secure and they can't sleep. You also may see eating disorders are very common. When you see children that have eating disorders such as bulimia or anorexia, or are overeating with comfort foods to trigger brain chemicals that make them feel good, you'll often find a dysfunctional family, particularly in high conflict parent alienation cases. It's like really so evident. As a result of that and the constant stress, you can get a compromised immune system. So what does that mean? That means that you might be more susceptible to colds and flu and even autoimmune diseases. Those are diseases where your body attacks itself. And that compromised immune system also can cause inflation inflammation. But inflammation can also affect all of your organs, and particularly your cardiovascular system. That's your heart, your veins, and your arteries. And that can result in the long term in heart disease. Sometimes you see the heart disease in children and adolescents, but more often than not, it appears in adulthood, and it's usually in the form of high blood pressure, valve problems, and those sorts of things. And you won't be surprised to discover that children that have grown up in a very traumatic environment, particularly if there's been severe parent alienation, often have a shortened lifespan. So now let's move on to what behaviors, how the trauma affects you behaviorally, how it affects children rather. And what happens with children is they have poor self-regulation. In other words, they often have discipline problems because they're either not active enough in raising their hand and participating, or they're overactive and dominating the whole scenario with disruptions of the classroom and getting into arguments and fights and not being able to remember the last thing that was told to them. You can also see a social withdrawal. So children that have come up through severe parent alienation have attachment issues and difficulties with trusting in relationships. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And the result of that is that they tend to withdraw socially. They also, might demonstrate more aggressive behavior in the classroom, on the playground, and in the community in general, particularly as they age up into adolescence. And they might demonstrate poor impulse control. They might be more likely to take risks and engage in illegal activity, such as using drugs, committing petty crimes, defying authority figures in school. With girls, and sometimes boys, but more often girls, you can often see cutting. You probably have read a lot about that and know a lot about that, but that's when a child makes superficial cuts with a sharp blade on their extremities, usually on their limbs or arms or legs. And those cuts are what we call self-stimulating behavior. So the child is trying to change the focus of the pain from in their mind to onto their body, because the body pain is easier to deal with than the pain of emotional trauma that comes from parent alienation. You'll also see many of the boys and girls that wind up pregnant with or conceive a child together and wind up pregnant, wind up as teenage parents, often have been subject to trauma in their families. And it's particularly, again, I can't stress enough that severe parent alienation is one of the most traumatic experiences an individual can go through in their whole lives, and it stays with you for a long time. And also, of course, again, your common sense would say that many children who engage in substance abuse, abusing alcohol, drugs, those children come from dysfunctional families, and often there's abuse involved, intimate partner abuse, and specific to this presentation today, of course, severe parent alienation. So now we've reviewed several topics. We've looked at the brain development, we've looked at the physical health and behavior. Now let's talk about emotions. So children that have been traumatized in severe parent alienation cases will have two types, probably more, but there's two that stick out for me. And one is difficulty in controlling their emotions and regulating their emotions. You see a theme here between all these different aspects, that you'll see a thread that runs through all these aspects. And the thread is difficulty in control, and trying to control their lives because their lives feel like they're out of control. And so they have difficulty controlling emotions, and they also have trouble recognizing their emotions. So if you ask a child that's traumatized like that, how are you feeling? They'll say, I don't know. I don't know how I should be feeling. People tell me different things, different stories. One time I feel this way, one time I feel that way. And sometimes they'll say, I'm just numb. I don't feel anything. So they also show children that have gone through this kind of trauma, limited coping skills. They get frustrated more easily than your typical child. They don't develop as much resilience. They don't develop as much grit and zest. They don't develop that ability that when you get knocked down, you get up again, because they just feel beaten down by the trauma of their parents in conflict and what they witnessed during that process in cases of severe parent alienation. They are also increased sensitivity to stress. So we talked about that, about autoimmune diseases a little earlier in an exaggerated immune response. And the increased sensitivity to stress contributes to that. Sometimes the child will feel shame and guilt and excessive worry and a sense of hopelessness. They feel that they are the cause of the parents' divorce and conflict. They often feel like, well, why wouldn't they work things out if they really loved me and if they really cared about me? Why can't they work this out? Why do they hate each other so much? Why do they put me in the middle so much? And In severe parent alienation, you have one parent that is the alienator and one parent's the alienated, and the child is often brainwashed and enmeshed with the parent that is weaponizing the child, is turning the child into a weapon against the other parent. So the child feels totally out of control. Feelings of helplessness and failure are common, and those are a lot of the emotions that go on. And it's not unusual for them, and we'll talk about this under the mental health considerations, to have mood disorders and anxiety disorders. Let's talk about relationships. So what happens to relationships with children who have experienced trauma as a result of severe parent alienation? Well, that's an interesting question, because what happens is that the children often develop attachment problems. And sometimes they'll be so alienated, particularly a young child, from the targeted parent that they will have an unhealthy attachment. The attachment will be fractured or disrupted, or it'll be a traumatic attachment. And so what does all that mean? That means that the child may not show the normal affection, normal love and caring that they showed to the alienated parent, the targeted parent, when things were good between their parents. The normal kinds of things: hugging, kissing, touching, read to me, here, come over and sit on my lap, sit next to me, let me tuck you into bed. Those kinds of normal things become more difficult. And when the targeted parent comes to pick up the child, for instance, a child might hide from the parent at the time of exchange. Well, you know that that's not normal. You know that. If you've been through a divorce, you know that that's not normal at all. And that the cases that I'm talking about only represent about 1 or 2% of all the divorce cases. Most are settled calmly. There are some elements of attributes of parent alienation, but the families adjust, adapt, and move on. So we look at attachment problems, poor understanding of social interactions, and difficulty in forming relationships with peers. So they also may have problems in romantic relationships as they grow older. The ability to trust, the ability to trust that another person could care about you because you're so damaged and you've seen such damaged relationships. Many of these children will never get married because they don't want to go through what they saw their parents go through, and they don't want to have children. They don't want to pass it on to their children. And that raises the next element under the issue of relationships, and that has to do with the intergenerational cycles of abuse and neglect. Now, don't let the big word phase you, but just think about the way I modeled some of my behavior in parenting was what I learned from my parents about parenting. Now, I have to tell you, my parents weren't the worst parents in the world, but they weren't the best parents in the world. And as a result, I had to unlearn some of the negative aspects of the parenting so that I could apply positive parenting skills to my children. And imagine going through the childhood trauma of severe parent alienation. Knowing what a good relationship looks like and what good parenting looks like is very difficult. So sometimes those parties have to have family counseling and psychoeducational counseling to learn new skills. And finally, and probably as important as any of the other aspects and more important, is the fact that there's a mental health aspect to all of this as well. Depression, anxiety, negative self-image, low self-esteem, post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are all possible diagnoses of children, and children who then age up and become adults who have gone through severe parent alienation trauma. Thoughts of suicide are not uncommon as well. So you have to be aware of that. If you've gone through that, you obviously had not obviously, but it's most likely that you've had to deal with those thoughts yourself. And occasionally a child will kill himself or herself, by accidentally, in quotes, driving into a telephone pole or taking an overdose of drugs. So what do you do about this? Well, briefly, that's a whole other presentation. But in brief, but essentially, you have to address the trauma in therapy with a skilled trauma therapist. And that kind of therapy is what we call trauma-informed care. And if you've gone through parent alienation, severe parent alienation as a child, finding somebody who specializes in that area of parent alienation and trauma-informed care is the best way to go. These are mental health professionals, highly qualified to treat trauma, particularly in cases of severe parent alienation. And the therapy for trauma from severe parent alienation is essential for recovery, acquiring coping skills, and leading a healthy and meaningful life. So let me just briefly review the topics that I covered today. Today I spoke to you about the trauma in childhood as a result of parent alienation, severe parent alienation, that it happens in about 1 or 2% of all custody cases. The subjects that I covered were cognition, that's the ability to learn, brain development, mostly taking place in infancy and early childhood, the impact on physical health of trauma, especially the compromised immune system and its relationship to organ and heart disease and a shortened lifespan, behaviors, essentially poor self-regulation, social withdrawal, and poor impulse control. Emotions, we talked about the difficulty in regulating, recognizing emotions, and developing coping skills. I presented to you difficulties with attachments and other relationships with a poor understanding of social interactions and difficulty as an adult in romantic relationships and intergenerational cycles of abuse and neglect. And finally, but as important, if not more so than all the other subjects, the impact on the mental health of children who are abused through the process of severe parent alienation. And that includes mood disorders such as depression or anxiety disorders such as panic disorders, negative low self-esteem, self-image, post-traumatic stress disorder, and thoughts of suicide. I hope that you found this presentation informative and helpful, and I wish you the best in your life. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Sue Kornbluth. Many of you know me as an expert in high conflict divorce and parental and grandparent alienation. It was an honor for me to present at the 2022 Family Access Conference, and I'm going to present again and be with you in 2023. This year, we are focusing on a topic that is so crucial to your healing and moving forward to reconnect with your children. We are going to talk about how to help you move through the trauma and the emotional abuse that is caused by alienation. I am specifically going to be with you to focus on identifying and learning how to release the trauma and abuse that has been caused by alienation. There's no doubt in my mind that you have been through a lot of trauma. The loss of not having your children in your life, but still knowing that they are alive and they are out there and you can't get to them, can feel awful at times. It may even feel that your soul is being sucked out of you. But I don't want you to feel that on a daily basis. We help our clients to move through that and beyond that, and they have. And I'm going to bring to you this year the tips and tools that I use to move you through your pain. You have a right to your pain. You have a right to feel panicked and scared and depressed sometimes, but you don't want to stay there. So this year, I am going to talk to you about coping mechanisms that you can use to identify the trauma, identify the emotional pain, and then I'm going to teach you on how to release it. One of the best things to release the pain that is inside of you is to find out where it is being stored in your body. When I feel pain or I feel trauma, it always gets stuck in my head or in my throat, and I'm not able to say sometimes what I need to say. I wonder where yours gets located, and we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about acceptance and forgiveness and talking about things that you cannot change and are stuck where you are. But most importantly, I'm going to talk to you about how to empower yourself to release the trauma and the emotional pain that is inside of you. And the way that we do that is by identifying our emotional triggers and letting go of them. I look forward to being with you in 2023 with Family Access. Stay strong and remember, conflict doesn't cure conflict. Compassion does.
Next week, Dr. Don Hubin will be presenting on the Constitution and child custody.